The sky over Baghdad erupted in a symphony of light and thunder on January 17, 1991. Fatima al-Rashid clutched her children to her chest as the first American Tomahawk missiles found their marks. The distant thud of explosions quickly grew closer, shaking the foundations of their modest home in the eastern district of the city. "Allah protect us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crescendo of anti-aircraft fire that scattered uselessly into the night sky. 3 days earlier, the family had been gathered around their television as the United Nations deadline for Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait had passed. Saddam Hussein's bold rhetoric about the mother of all battles had filled the airwaves, but now, as the windows rattled and dust rained from the ceiling, such words seemed hollow to Fatima's husband. "Ahmed, take the children to the basement," he commanded, his face illuminated by another flash of distant explosions. The family had prepared for this possibility, stocking water, canned food, and blankets in their small cellar. But the reality of war arriving at their doorstep still struck them with cold, paralyzing fear. 12-year-old Tariq, the eldest of the 3 children, tried to appear brave as he helped his younger siblings down the narrow staircase. Inside, he trembled. The school, where he had been studying just yesterday, was less than a kilometer from a military installation. Would it still be standing tomorrow? This description of the first night of bombing draws from accounts published in the New York Times article "Baghdad Under Bombardment" from January 1991, which documented civilian experiences during the initial air campaign. Outside, Baghdad's skyline transformed with each passing minute. The precision strikes targeted government buildings, communication centers, and military installations, but the shockwaves knew no such distinctions. In neighborhoods throughout the city, windows shattered, and civilians huddled together in darkness, their faces lit only by candles and the occasional flash of explosions. In the basement, Fatima's mother, Khaled, an elderly woman who had survived the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, prayed continuously. "I have seen, too, much war in one lifetime," she murmured. Her arthritic fingers moved methodically over her prayer beads. Ahmed ventured upstairs periodically, reporting what little he could see. "The Ministry of Defense is burning," he announced after one such journey. "The sky above the presidential palace is filled with tracer fire." As dawn approached, the intensity of the bombardment seemed to ease slightly. The family remained below ground, listening to a small battery-powered radio. The government broadcaster maintained that Iraqi forces were valiantly defending the homeland, inflicting heavy casualties on the American aggressors. But the continuous explosions told a different story. Tariq's younger sister, Noor, just 7 years old, had finally fallen asleep against her grandmother's shoulder. "Will our house be here tomorrow, Baba?" Tariq asked his father. Ahmed paused before answering, his face showing the strain of a man trying to protect his family from truths too harsh to bear. "Allah decides such things," he finally replied. "We can only have faith." Outside their shelter, Operation Desert Storm had begun its systematic dismantling of Iraq's military infrastructure. For the al-Rashid family and millions of other Iraqi civilians, life under Saddam Hussein's regime had been difficult. But what lay ahead would test their resilience in ways they could scarcely imagine. The war had arrived not as a distant political concept, but as a physical force that shook their homes, threatened their lives, and would soon challenge their very survival in a city under siege. By the 5th day of bombing, a strange routine had settled over the al-Rashid household. The family emerged from their basement shelter during the daylight hours when the air raids were less frequent, hurriedly cooking meals and gathering news before retreating underground, as night fell and the bombardment intensified. Baghdad had transformed. The once bustling metropolis now stood eerily quiet during the day, its streets largely deserted except for emergency vehicles and the occasional civilian dashing between buildings in search of supplies. The electricity had failed on the 2nd day, and with it went the water pumps. Standing in line for water became a new daily ritual, and a dangerous one. "They say the Americans are using smart bombs," muttered a man ahead of Ahmed in the water. "Hugh, if they're so smart, why did they hit the Al-Firdos bunker last night? 300 civilians, they say, women and children." According to Human Rights Watch reports from 1991, the Al-Firdos bunker strike resulted in one of the highest civilian death tolls of the conflict when the facility, which Iraqi civilians had been using as an air raid shelter, was mistakenly identified as a military command center and bombed. Ahmed returned home with only 2 jerry cans of water. "It must last us 3 days," he told Fatima grimly. The family now washed with dampened cloths and drank carefully measured portions. The children's faces had grown noticeably thinner in less than a week. In their neighborhood, a strange camaraderie had developed among those who remained. Many had fled to relatives in rural areas before the bombing began, but for families like the Al-Rashids, with nowhere else to go, mutual aid became essential. Ahmed exchanged a precious tin of meat for batteries from their neighbor Karim, whose son had worked at an electronics shop and had stockpiled supplies. 12-year-old Tariq had taken to keeping a journal, recording the names of buildings destroyed and the changing patterns of the airstrikes. They hit the telephone exchange at exactly the same time for 3 nights, he noted with a child's attention to pattern. "Tonight they will come at 11:18. His mother discovered him watching the clock that evening, nodding with grim satisfaction when distant explosions began at exactly the time he'd predicted. "You should be asleep," she scolded, but without conviction. Sleep had become a luxury that evaded them all. On the 7th day, news traveled through the neighborhood that a market in the Sabah district had been hit. 32 civilians killed. While shopping for dwindling food supplies, the official radio blamed American targeting. Later rumors suggested a malfunctioning Iraqi anti-aircraft missile had fallen back to Earth. "Does it matter whose bomb it was?" Khaled asked when the family discussed the tragedy. The dead remained dead. For 7-year-old Noor, the constant, fear had manifested in a stubborn rash across her arms. The family's supply of ointment was nearly exhausted, and the nearby clinic had closed after its windows were shattered by a blast 3 streets away. Fatima fashioned a soothing paste from the cooking oil and herbs she had dried the previous summer. As she applied it to her daughter's inflamed skin, she sang old lullabies, her voice barely audible above the distant thunder of explosions. "When will it end, Ahmed?" she asked her husband that night as they lay sleepless on their thin mattresses in the basement. "When Saddam withdraws from Kuwait," he whispered, "or when there is nothing left to bomb." Neither prospect offered much comfort as another wave of explosions lit up the night sky, closer than before. The concrete shelter trembled, dust filtering down from the ceiling like silent gray snow, covering the family as they huddled together in the darkness of a city under relentless attack. By early February, rumors of a ground war had begun to circulate. The constant aerial bombardment had settled into a grim rhythm, but new fears now gripped Baghdad's remaining population. Hussein Karim, Ahmed's cousin from Basra in the south, arrived at their doorstep one morning, his clothes dusty from travel on roads regularly strafed by coalition aircraft. "The Americans are massing at the Saudi border," Hussein reported grimly as he accepted a small cup of the precious, carefully rationed coffee. "Our southern cities are being pounded day and night. I've brought my truck. You must come with me to my sister's village outside Karbala. At least there are no military targets nearby." A BBC documentary from 1995 titled Desert Storm: The Forgotten Victims chronicled the massive civilian displacement during the conflict, with an estimated 2 million Iraqis fleeing major cities for rural areas. The decision to leave their home tore at Ahmed and Fatima. Everything they owned, every memory, every moment of their married life, was contained within these walls. But Hussein's descriptions of the intensifying bombardment in the south, combined with the deteriorating conditions in Baghdad, finally convinced them. "We will leave tomorrow at first light," Ahmed announced to the family that evening. The night that followed was spent in frantic preparation. Each family member could bring only what they could carry. For Khaled, this meant her Quran and the framed photograph of her late husband. Tariq agonized over which books to take, finally selecting his mathematics text and journal. Little, Noor clutched her one remaining doll, its dress already grimy from nights in the basement shelter. Fatima moved through the house, touching objects as if to commit them to memory. The kitchen table where they had shared so many meals, the living room carpet purchased with a year's savings, the children's height marks penciled onto the doorframe. They departed before sunrise, 6 people crammed into Hussein's aging pickup truck with their essential belongings tied down under a tarpaulin in the back. As they navigated the rubble-strewn streets of Baghdad, Tariq twisted in his seat, watching the familiar skyline, now broken and smoking, recede behind them. The journey south proved harrowing. Twice they were forced to pull off the road and take cover as coalition aircraft screamed overhead. Near Hilla, they passed the smoldering remains of an Iraqi military convoy hit just hours earlier. The charred hulks of vehicles and scattered equipment bore mute testimony to the conflict's ferocity. "Don't look," Fatima instructed the children, but Tariq's eyes remained fixed on the destruction. It was the first time he had seen direct evidence of death, and though no bodies were visible from their position, the implications were clear enough. At checkpoints, nervous Iraqi soldiers, many looking barely older than teenagers, inspected their papers and questioned their movements. "Why are you fleeing?" one demanded. "Patriots stay and fight the invader." Hussein, who had navigated such encounters before, responded deferentially. "My elderly mother needs medical attention not available in Baghdad, sir. We go only to seek treatment and will return to defend our capital." The lie worked, though Ahmed noticed his cousin's hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel afterward. By mid-afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Karbala, where the landscape transformed from urban sprawl to agricultural fields. Hussein's sister Zainab lived in a modest farmhouse with her husband and 4 children. The arrival of 6 more people strained the household's resources, but the welcome was genuine. "You will stay until it is safe to return," Zainab insisted, already arranging sleeping spaces in the main room. That night, away from Baghdad for the first time in the conflict, the al-Rashid family slept without the immediate soundtrack of bombardment, though distant thuds occasionally punctuated the darkness. Tariq wrote in his journal, "We have escaped the bombs, but brought their sound with us in our heads. I still hear them even in silence." Life in Zainab's village offered a different kind of hardship. Food was more plentiful than in Baghdad. The family kept chickens and grew vegetables, but fuel shortages meant cold nights and cooking over carefully managed wood fires. News came sporadically, through battery-powered radios or travelers passing through the village. On February 24th, 1991, Hussein burst into the house, his face grave. "It has begun," he announced. "The coalition forces have crossed into Iraq and Kuwait. The ground war is underway." The Washington Post correspondent reporting from southern Iraq noted in late February that civilians in villages throughout the south described the bewildering speed of the coalition advance, with many learning of the ground war only as tanks rolled past their homes. For the next 4 days, the family gathered around the radio each evening, listening to the increasingly desperate pronouncements from Baghdad. The official broadcaster claimed great victories against the invaders, but the rapid coalition advance told a different story. "Saddam has led us to disaster," Ahmed's uncle Ibrahim muttered during one such broadcast. A veteran of the Iran-Iraq War, Ibrahim had lost a leg in that conflict and harbored no illusions about this one. 8 years fighting, Iran, then Kuwait, and now this. How much can one people endure? Such dangerous talk would have been unthinkable in Baghdad, where Saddam's security services might be listening, but here in the countryside, bitter truths flowed more freely. On February 26th, reports reached the village of the Highway of Death, the road between Kuwait and Basra, where retreating Iraqi forces had been devastated by coalition air power. Hussein, who had relatives in Kuwait, went ashen at the news. "My cousin Mahmoud was with the Republican Guard in Kuwait," he said quietly. "We have heard nothing from him since January." The ground war's progress seemed impossibly swift. Coalition forces sliced through Iraqi defenses with minimal resistance. The elite Republican Guard units, which propaganda had portrayed as invincible, were being rapidly outflanked and destroyed. For Tariq, now keeping a map in his journal and marking coalition positions based on radio reports, the military situation was becoming clear even to his young mind. "They will reach Baghdad within days," he predicted to his father. But on February 28th, after just 100 hours of ground combat, the radio brought unexpected news. A ceasefire had been declared. President Bush had ordered coalition forces to halt their advance. Iraq had been driven from Kuwait, its military shattered, but Saddam Hussein remained in power in Baghdad. The announcement brought conflicted emotions to the gathered families. Relief that the immediate danger of invasion had passed mingled with uncertainty about what would follow. Would it be safe to return to Baghdad? What remained of their city after weeks of bombing? That evening, as the adults debated these questions, Tariq found 7-year-old Noor sitting alone behind the house, crying silently. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside his sister on the hard-packed earth. "I want to go home," she said simply. "But I'm afraid our home isn't there anymore." Tariq put his arm around her shoulders, unable to offer reassurances he didn't believe himself. In his pocket, his journal contained calculations of the tonnage of bombs dropped on Baghdad, numbers that made the survival of their modest home seem increasingly unlikely. Above them, the stars emerged in a clear sky unmarked by tracer fire or the flash of explosions for the first time in over 40 days. The war seemed to be ending, but for the displaced families of Iraq, the struggle was far from over. March arrived with whispering winds carrying dust from the south and rumors of uprising. Shiite populations in Basra, Najaf, and Karbala had revolted against Saddam's weakened regime, encouraged by American broadcasts but ultimately abandoned to their fate. Kurdish regions in the north followed suit. For a brief moment, it seemed the dictator's grip might finally break. "We should wait," Hussein urged when Ahmed spoke of returning to Baghdad. "The situation is too unstable." But news of the brutal suppression of these rebellions by Saddam's still loyal Republican Guard units soon reached the village. Helicopter gunships, which coalition forces had allowed the regime to continue flying, were being turned against Iraqi civilians with devastating effect. Human Rights Watch documented in their 1992 report, Endless Torment, the 1991 uprising in Iraq and its aftermath, that up to 30,000 civilians were killed in the regime's suppression of the post-war rebellions. "We cannot stay indefinitely," Ahmed insisted after 2 weeks in the crowded farmhouse. "Others need our home if it still stands, and if it doesn't, we must know." The decision to return came after lengthy family discussions. Khalid would remain with Zainab. The journey would be too difficult for the elderly woman, but the rest of the al-Rashid family would make the trip back to Baghdad. Hussein agreed to drive them, though his face betrayed his concern. "The Americans may have stopped bombing," he warned, "but Saddam's men are everywhere, more dangerous than before. They look for scapegoats to blame for their defeat." The journey north revealed a landscape transformed by war. Military vehicles lay abandoned or destroyed along the highways. Bridges had been targeted with precision munitions, forcing lengthy detours. Most disturbing were the checkpoints, not coalition forces, but Saddam's security services, checking papers with heightened suspicion, searching for insurrectionists or deserters. At one such checkpoint outside Al-Hilla, guards pulled a man from the car ahead of them. "He fought for the Americans," one soldier shouted as they dragged him behind a concrete barrier. The family heard shouting, then a single gunshot. Hussein accelerated away as soon as they were cleared to proceed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Baghdad came into view by mid-afternoon, or what remained of it. The skyline that had defined Tariq's childhood was fundamentally altered. Ministry buildings stood as hollow shells, their facades sheared away to reveal the skeletal concrete beneath. Plumes of black smoke still rose from several districts. "The oil fires," Hussein explained, though his voice suggested he was trying to convince himself. "They haven't been extinguished yet." Their neighborhood in eastern Baghdad had been spared direct hits, but proximity to targeted installations had taken its toll. Windows were universally shattered, facades pockmarked by shrapnel. As they turned onto their street, Fatima gasped. A neighbor's home, the Karim family, had been completely destroyed, apparently by an errant bomb or missile. They left before the war, Ahmed recalled. Thank God. Their own home stood intact, though not unscathed. The front door had been broken in. Whether by blast pressure or looters remained unclear. Inside, a fine layer of dust covered everything. Water damage stained the ceilings where rain had entered through broken windows. The refrigerator, without power for weeks, emitted a stench that made Noor gag when Ahmed unwisely opened it. "We can clean," Fatima said with determined optimism. "We can repair." But the city around them remained broken in ways less easily fixed. That evening, as Hussein prepared to return to Karbala, he delivered a final warning. "Saddam is wounded but not finished. He will seek vengeance on his own people for their perceived disloyalty. Keep your heads down, cousin. This war isn't truly over." As darkness fell over Baghdad, the family huddled in their damaged home, the electricity still absent, water supplies uncertain. Tariq wrote in his journal by candlelight, "We survived the American bombs only to fear our own government. More. Is this what victory looks like to anyone?" By summer 1991, a new normal had established itself in Baghdad. The physical reconstruction proceeded slowly. Buildings were patched, streets cleared of debris, but the deeper wounds remained untreated. United Nations sanctions, implemented before the war and continued after, strangled Iraq's economy. Basics. Goods became luxury items. Inflation rendered savings nearly worthless. For the al-Rashid family, daily life became a continuous struggle for essentials. Ahmed's job at the telecommunications ministry no longer existed. The building had been reduced to rubble in the first days of bombing. Instead, he found occasional work repairing damaged houses for those wealthy enough to afford repairs. "Least we have each other," Fatima reminded the family during particularly difficult moments. And indeed, compared to many, they had been fortunate. Their neighbor Karim had returned to find not only his home destroyed, but also learn that his oldest son, drafted into the army in January, had perished somewhere along the Kuwaiti border. A 1993 UNICEF report titled Iraq, the Children Cannot Wait, documented the devastating impact of post-war sanctions, noting that child mortality had increased by 300% in the 2 years following Operation Desert Storm. The most insidious effects of the war emerged in the months that followed. The destroyed infrastructure, particularly water, treatment facilities and sewage systems, led to outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. Hospitals, already damaged by bombing and deprived of medicines by sanctions, could barely cope. When Noor developed a fever in July, the family faced terrifying hours waiting in an overcrowded hospital corridor. Before the war, this would have been a simple matter. A haggard doctor told Fatima as he finally examined the child. "Now we have nothing. No antibiotics, no proper diagnostic equipment." Noor recovered, but many children did not. Funerals became commonplace, particularly for the very young and the elderly, victims not of bombs but of their aftermath. Contaminated water, malnutrition, treatable diseases rendered fatal by lack of medicine. For Tariq, now 13, the war had accelerated his journey to adulthood. His school had reopened by autumn, but with windows covered by plastic sheeting and textbooks in short supply. He continued his journal, documenting not military targets now, but the price of bread, the hours of electricity when it sporadically returned, the names of classmates who disappeared from school because their families had fled the country. "We won every battle, but lost the war," Ibrahim told Ahmed during a rare family gathering to celebrate Khalid's return from the countryside. The old woman had aged visibly in the months apart, her face more deeply lined, her movements more tentative. "No," she corrected her son. "We did not win or lose. We survived. Sometimes that is enough." By winter, new rumors circulated, of American planes still patrolling Iraqi skies, of no-fly zones being established in the north and south, of Saddam rebuilding his palaces while ordinary Iraqis went hungry. The war had ended, but its shadow stretched forward across years yet to come. One evening in December, as rare winter rain tapped against the repaired windows of their home, Tariq found his father studying his war journal, the careful notations of bombs and targets now historical. "Documents of a sort. Do you think they knew?" Tariq asked suddenly. "The Americans, when they dropped their bombs, did they know about us down below?" Ahmed closed the journal gently before answering. "They knew there were people," he said carefully. "But perhaps, not that there was you, Tariq. Not your sister, not your mother. not the particular people that we are. War makes particulars invisible. Later that night, Tariq made his final entry in the journal that had chronicled their war. The planes have gone, but we still live beneath their shadow. This is what war leaves behind, not just broken buildings, but broken certainties. Before the bombs fell, I thought our lives were fixed and solid. Now I understand that everything can change in a moment. That safety is just a story we tell ourselves. But we go on, because that is what people do. We go on. Outside, Baghdad continued its slow healing, a city bearing the scars of Operation Desert Storm, its people navigating the complex aftermath of a war that had been fought in their name, but without their consent, a war that for Tariq, Noor, and their generation would define all that came after.